Our world is changing faster and faster. In just a few decades, we'll use urban airspace to move goods and people over congested cities. Autonomous aircraft will begin to take flight, making single pilot and pilotless operations more commonplace. The aircraft of the future will challenge engineers to explore technologies where there is little or no design precedent, pushing engineers to use simulation as the only way to innovate and thrive in this hyper-competitive industry. ANSYS provides the only truly comprehensive solution for simulating and testing autonomous aircraft systems, to simulate and validate human-machine interfaces, to design advanced communication systems, and to reduce the time and cost of embedded software creation and certification. ANSYS is helping to bring the next generation of aircraft to market, lowering costs and exceeding the safety standards of a more autonomous world. Breakthrough technologies are creating new opportunities for our industry. Are you ready? With ANSYS, the sky's the limit. Celebrating 50 years of breakthrough innovations.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. To hear the simultaneous interpreting, please select an audio channel by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom right of the Zoom screen. This program is organized by ISIC Japan in association with Janes and produced by Bloom Pacific and Versatech. Supporters in alphabetical order are as follows: ANSYS, BAE Systems, Patria, Pratt & Whitney, and ST Engineering. Interpreters are Christopher Field and Paul Hersey. I would now like to turn the floor over to former Special Advisor to Prime Minister Abe's cabinet, Dr. Taniguchi Tomohiko, who will moderate this defense industry forum on the topic of legislation, expectations, and concerns, measures to revitalize the defense industrial base. Good evening, everyone, to our ISIC webinar. Japan's defense policy is now facing a very great change of one of many decades. There is also a very high expectations for the future of our defense industry. Today we are looking with 4 experts at this changing face of the Japanese defense industry, whom we wish to discuss this with in detail. Each of them deserves a detailed introduction. For that, please have a look at the ISIC homepage website. I want to use the time we have as efficiently as possible. Our first speaker is Mr. Matsumoto. He is currently at ATLA, where he is the head of the Department of Technical Strategy for ATLA. He has previously worked at the Japanese embassy, has great experience at the Ministry of Defense. He's truly an expert. So let me please hand the microphone to Dr. Matsumoto. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm the head of the Department of the Technical Strategy Department at ATLA. My name is Matsumoto. It's good to be with you. Our theme is revitalization of the defense production base. I formerly worked in the equipment policy department, and so I would like to talk about the thinking behind the law to strengthen the defense production base. 2 years ago, I became the equipment policy division chief and immediately began working upon this very policy. Basically, a law concerning the defense industry had never been created. So the Ministry of Defense took up this project. To be honest, it was very tough. There was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of opposition. But in the regular session of the Diet, it recently passed. The bill passed, and so it took about 2 years, and it will come into force on the 1st of October. Industrial policy on the part of the Ministry of Defense had hardly ever been reflected all in the form of law. It had not been set out with any specificity. There was a lot of discussion. There was a lot on the agenda. Where shall we start? That was the first discussion. Next page, please. The first step really had to be the government of Japan has to take the industrial base of Japan seriously as defensive power. So that was the first step, was to make that explicit. The 3 strategic documents that were issued in December did that. They made it explicit that the defense industrial base is defensive power. However, that was not law. Those were strategic documents. But in law, it doesn't say the defense production base itself is defensive power, but it does talk about the importance of the defense industrial base. So not just the Ministry of Defense, but the Japanese government has to take due consideration of the importance of the defense industry. And also the Diet has to do so. So that was the first step. And then moving on, this was to be the first law that would talk about strengthening the defense industrial base. And so the next step was the Defense Ministry's policy. I'll be going into this later, but it's already out for public comment, and it will become the government's policy. There was a lot on the agenda, as I said. When we were creating this bill, my understanding of the problem was that our defense industry is substantially weakened and suffers from a lack of technological advantage, a lack of international competitiveness, and also from the standpoint of economic security, we have to pay more attention to the defense industry. Those were the broad categories where we saw a need to take action. And it would have been possible to take up various agendas, various menus, if you will. But looking at the example of the Republic of Korea, they have a body similar to ATLA that has created a very comprehensive law to support industry. And this was part of our discussion. This was the very first law for Japan. So every step was difficult to take. And so we had to reduce the number of agenda items and to take up the most high priority items first: supply chain risk, manufacturing process issues. Everyone in the defense industry know this very well, but many companies have both a defense business and a civil business. And the civil industries have bright and shiny cutting edge equipment, whereas the defense manufacturing factories have machine tools that are decades old. The buildings are also very old. That's a rather common issue, and something should be done about it. Also, cybersecurity measures, information assurance is becoming critical. And we have not been able to make a sufficiently comprehensive approach to this. And another priority is that companies have been withdrawing from their defense industry. So far, the Ministry of Defense has focused on prime contractors. However, we have to understand the defense production base as a whole, including suppliers. We had always focused on contracts with prime contractors, but that approach has its limits. We have to be able to contract directly with subcontractors of primes, with other suppliers. We need some kind of a framework to be able to support these suppliers directly. So those were the main priorities of our discussion that we saw as the most pressing issues. Another point was that defense transfers, equipment transfers. We've had webinars on this too, I think, but we haven't made much progress. And so what should be done about this was another point of discussion. And this legislation package passed. There was a lot of discussion in the Diet. And it's not the case that our defense industry has developed in a strong way. And personally, I think that this law is a good first step, but that we have to continue action. There are many actions that are still required, not just legislation, but improvement of systems, changing the way that we do contracts. There are various issues. This law was a first step. It's the first time that the Ministry of Defense proposed a bill having to do basically with the state of the defense industry. Next page, please. Let me now go over some of the main points of our basic policy. Basically, this law makes explicit that we will give importance to the domestic industrial base. And as I mentioned, this is the first time that it has been made explicit that we will not just focus on prime contractors, but on other suppliers as well. And we also need international cooperation, especially to make our supply chain more comprehensive. We must introduce cutting-edge technology from abroad. Also, when you look at Ukraine, it's important to have a mutual exchange to be possible. Also, reorganization of the defense industry is something that we looked at. In principle, we will respect the management decisions of individual firms, but the Ministry of Defense would prefer firms that have a higher degree of dependence on defense. Various discussions between the government and the private sector will be necessary. As to the future direction, next page, please. We have a 43 trillion yen budget, quite large budget. We must steadily and efficiently and effectively implement this budget. This is the top priority of the Ministry of Defense. Also, what we must do, now we're talking about the defense industrial base. We have to expand it to include new technologies, new cutting-edge technologies, new industries. And we are considering various systems to do this. Also, achieving technological superiority is an issue. This law will be insufficient alone to accomplish that. So various policies will be pursued to that end. And defense equipment transfer is something that could be done about. And the members of this webinar, I'm sure, will have a discussion on that. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matsumoto-san. This comprehensive law has been created, and now we have to work on increasing our domestic demand. I would now like to turn to Dr. Hokazono, who is has been the former Deputy Commissioner and Chief Defense Scientist of Acquisition Technology and Logistics Agency, ATLA. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Hokazono. I received this discussion to talk about how legislation, expectation, and concerns, and I would like to talk about that, please. If I could ask for the first slide. The next one after that, please. Over a period of declining and almost flat defense budgets for about a quarter of a century since the 1990s, Japan's defense industry has gradually lost its vitality for sustained production. Previous slide, please. This one, sorry. Defense responsible only to the requirements of the self-defense force, and the high price of high technology equipment, low profit margins from government procurement, and an increase in FMS and other imported equipment has meant that many companies that played an important role in the supply chain for development and production of defense equipment have begun to withdraw from the field in recent years. So this has got a serious effect. Last year, our company said that the technology infrastructure and production is itself our defense force, and that to build a strong and sustainable defense industry, the government should act across all ministries and actively adopt advanced technologies from both the public and private sectors. It also said that in fiscal year 2027, the budget for strengthening our defense capability and related measures will be increased to around 2% of GDP. We had a detailed discussion of this from Dr. Matsumoto. The Defense Production-Based Reinforcement Law, which was enacted in June of this year, enables the provision of funds to improve manufacturing efficiencies and enhance cybersecurity, as well as subsidies for specification changes needed to transfer equipment to other countries, and the nationalization of manufacturing facilities. I'd like to now have the next slide, please. There is, of course, no disagreement that the defense budget increases and statutory support for the defense industry will be a major driving force for the defense industry in Japan to regain its vitality. However, for Japan's defense industry to have the ability to develop and produce superior defense equipment and to become a truly sustainable, solid, and internationally competitive defense production and technology base, we will need budgetary measures and laws, but more than that, we believe we need to simultaneously consider and resolve a number of different issues we are facing. Metaphorically, we could say the defense budget increase and the defense equipment production base reinforcement law are like an urgent blood transfusion or IV for a weakened defense industry. A weakened body cannot be restored to true health and vitality through blood transfusions or IVs alone. That requires further appropriate rehabilitation and strength training. Next slide, please. For Japan to restore its a truly healthy body in the defense industry, I would like to discuss 4 particularly important issues that must be priorities for the future. And this slide shows ensuring an ecosystem for an agile development and acquisition of advanced defense equipment, promoting digital transformation, promoting equipment and technology transfer, and promoting international joint development and production are very important topics. Next slide, please. In the rapid progress of advanced technology in the 21st century, such as AI, quantum computing, automatization, Internet of Things, and so forth, have brought numerous benefits to our lives, but at the same time have created new security threats, such as cyber attacks and hybrid warfare through the spread of disinformation. In recent years, the main security challenge for other countries has been, therefore, to rapidly and efficiently create advanced technologies and equipment that can counter these continually emerging new threats. For this purpose, Japan needs to establish project management for the entire life cycle based on an OODA loop, which is different from the conventional PDCA loop, which plan, do, check, action cycle. This means constantly observing, which is the observe, changes in threats, trends in emerging technologies, and the state of defense policy and operational concepts from policy, operation, and technical perspectives, and link the results of those observations to prompt situational judgment. That's the orient, and decision-making, decide. We need to significantly strengthen intake points for civilian technologies, as the U.S. does with DARPA and the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, as well as outlets for the results of defense research and development into the civilian field. The ATLA has continued to strengthen these efforts in recent years, and there's a high expectation that these efforts will lead to results. In addition, we need to review Japan's uniform government contracting system and consider introducing a flexible contracting system like the OTA, the Other Transaction Authority in the US, and to encourage new entrants such as startups and ventures that have no experience with government contracts. Next slide, please. Second, we are late in the digital transformation area for the defense industry. In other words, we believe that model-based system design and digital mission engineering based on the digital twin and digital thread concepts using the latest digital technology and data science should be strategically introduced into the development production of defense equipment. Model-based system design, for example, will bring many advantages, such as the reduction of risk and cost, the speeding up of the search for defects, and realization of optimal advanced equipment systems through digital design and digital prototyping and digital certification. For example, airworthiness certification. May I have the next slide, please? Digital mission engineering is also expected to bring revolutionary advantages in the development of optimal operating concepts and new equipment system and so forth. Unfortunately, Japan's overseas transfer of defense equipment and related technologies has not made much progress since the cabinet decision of the 3 principles in 2014. The preamble of the three principles clearly states Japan's peace cannot be ensured by Japan alone, and from the standpoint of positive pacifism, based on the principle of international cooperation, defense equipment transfers contribute to the promotion of the maintenance of international peace and security. We also say that the reasons for the lack of significant progress in overseas transfer of Japan's defense equipment include the following reasons. One, Japan's defense equipment matches the requirements and specifications of the self-defense force, but does not necessarily match the defense needs of other countries. Things like compatibility with international standards and criteria such as I mentioned, airworthiness or NATO specifications have to be confirmed. Generally high prices for our equipment due to small production, small volume production to meet the self-defense force needs, and insufficient production, maintenance, and development capacity to go beyond domestic demand. According to the three principles of defense equipment transfer, with the exception of international joint development and production and AXA and license backs, transferable equipment is limited to these five types: rescue equipment, transport, warning, surveillance, and minesweeping. To promote defense equipment transfers, we believe that more fruitful discussions involving the government, the public, and the private sector are needed on these issues. Currently, the government is discussing the revisions of the operating guidelines for the three principles of defense equipment transfer, and attention is focused on the treatment of the five types of equipment I just mentioned: the rescue, transport, warning, surveillance, and minesweeping. Next slide, please. Two major programs for international joint development and production have recently been launched. One is the Global Combat Air Program, GCAP, for next generation fighter aircraft, which was announced in December 2022. Another is the joint development of GPI, Glide Phase Interceptor for HGV, Hypersonic Gliding Vehicle, between Japan and the US, which was announced by the Ministry of Defense this past August. As defense equipment becomes more sophisticated, complex, and expensive worldwide, it has become extremely difficult for any one country to develop and acquire the latest equipment with superior performance. Many countries are therefore strategically pushing for international joint development and production of defense equipment with their allies and friendly countries. International joint development and production of defense equipment contributes to the strengthening of security relations among participating countries, and at the same time is expected to offer advantages over single country development and production, such as lower development costs, more effective acquisition of technologies, and higher production volumes. These projects will contribute greatly to the strengthening of our defense industry foundations. The lessons that we have learned: we need to actively apply digital transformation. We need to engage in design, manufacturing, and test designs based on international certification standards for airworthiness and the like. We need operational financial management of international ventures. We need to gain skill in information security systems and clearances. We need production divisions of labor and third country transfers. These are lessons learned, and we believe that various lessons will contribute to the internationalization of our defense industry and the strengthening of our defense production. I have high expectations. That is all I have from my side right now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Okazono. In the Q&A portion, I think there will be most likely questions, but let me move ahead of that and just ask you this point. In the five fields that you mentioned, rescue, transport, warning, surveillance, and minesweeping, in these five fields, it's only in these fields that Japan's equipment can be transferred abroad. Now, you said that this is being reviewed. What kind of review is going on? For example, we have the Kaige, the Soryu, wonderful submarines. Is there a chance, is it just a dream that, for example, Australia might be able to buy these? That's a very, I spoke about this with someone in the government recently. It's a very important point from the standpoint of equipment transfer from our country. To answer your question, first of all, based the equipment transfers are going to be very difficult for our country. How can we review this? How can we revise this? It is a problem that faces us. Specifically, we have the U.S. English and U.S. U.S. England and Japan joint development projects. We have high expectations that we're going to be able to resolve problems that come up through these projects. Thank you, Dr. Hokozano. I have kept you waiting, Dr. Ito. Thank you. Ito Kotaro is currently a senior research fellow at Canon Institute for Global Studies. He's also a lecturer at Hosei University in the Faculty of Sustainable Studies. His specialty is Korean diplomacy and defense policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Ito of the Canon Institute. I'm pleased to have this opportunity. I think that the topic of my talk is familiar to most of you, and that is the tremendous development of South Korea's defense industry. Next slide, please. In recent years. So first of all, as I already mentioned, the great state of the Republic of Korea's defense industry in recent years. The war in Ukraine in July, Poland ordered a tremendous amount of equipment from the ROK. So that makes last year a special year because of the Ukraine war. However, if you look at the trend of growth, it's been steady for more than 10 years, even 20 years. It's not as if this arose out of nowhere. You look at the data on the right. I think that you are all aware of this. In the top 10 defense exporters, South Korea has had tremendous growth. And my talk will focus on why South Korea was able to achieve this. Next slide, please. So, more than 50 years ago, South Korea's defense industry began in the 1970s. And what was the background to that? In 1948, the ROK was established and the Korean Army was established. But at the time, they had rifles, not very good equipment. They got just very light equipment from the US, and this was a bitter experience for them. And then in just 3 days, the North Koreans were able to take over Seoul in the war. And so they have the memory of their government collapsing because of this invasion. But even after the Korean War, you may know this, in the Blue House raid, the North Koreans tried to assassinate the South Korean president. There were various incidents caused by the North in the 1960s. And the United States did not provide strong weapons to South Korea. They did not want yet another war. The US was focused at the time on the Vietnam War. And so the president at that time was Park Chung-hee. They tried to calm him down and to not provide him with good weaponry. However, Park Chung-hee was not satisfied with this and said that a country without technology would be doomed. And so they reverse engineered US Nike missiles, and there's a picture here of a successful missile launch by the South Koreans. They pursued both nuclear and missile development. And the US discovered this, and they ended up abandoning nuclear development, but they continued with missile development. And within the span of 10 years, they were able to produce basic equipment like tanks and aircraft. Next slide. Next slide, please. And after the Park Chung-hee era in the 1970s, tanks, ships, airplanes, large defense items were created. But in the 80s, they were able to procure their own equipment. But once deployed, they couldn't get any more orders. And so the operating rate of the factories went down. It's similar to the situation that Japan finds itself. So for more than 10 years, more than 20 years, they've been trying to export. And the barrier to this was the United States. Still, materials and parts, the ROK was dependent on the US, and the US would not export them. So even though the South Koreans wanted to export, they couldn't. This was yet another bitter experience with the United States. Finally, under Roh Mi-hon in the 2000s, as head of department Matsumoto said earlier, they created the ADD, similar to Japan's ATLAM. And this was a new development. Next slide, please. In the late 1990s, there were some phenomena that affected the defense industry in the ROK. The Asian financial crisis resulted in the IMF having a plan for Korea, and this caused Korea to become more internationalized. There were more English-only classes in Korean universities, and they had to try to train up a generation that could sell Korea abroad. So they're more than 10 years ahead of Japan on this. And then digitalization, including making their government digital. This resulted in it being more easy to export and make it possible to get access through digital means. And the third is rationalization. A bestseller is their self-propelled howitzer, the K9. Samsung Tech In developed this. However, through mergers and acquisitions, this business moves to Hanwha. And Hanwha is developing as a global business currently. Next slide, please. This is the result of the ROK's defense exports. Russia and China pose security threats to various countries, and this map clearly shows those countries. And the first focus was Asian countries, the developing countries. But then in 2014, with the annexation of Crimea, Poland, Norway, Finland, Estonia got the K9 Caterpillar tracks. The Baltic countries began to procure them as well. Also, India, which has a standoff with China, has also procured the K9 self-propelled howitzer. You no doubt remember this, but there was a land tussle in the Ladakh area between India and China. And South Korean K9s are deployed in that region. Next slide, please. So the South Koreans are good at sales. And why is that? They're able to customize, localize, downsize, downgrade like their customers want. So they don't get caught up in immediate profits, but they respond to the needs of the customer country. We should pay attention to this. So what does this map on the left shows? They are trying to sell the K9 self-propelled howitzer to the UK. So on the former Twitter, on X, these images are available. And as you can see, if the UK procures the K9 from the ROK, then here are the jobs that will be created in the UK. If you produce the electrical components, here's how many jobs. The mechanical components, here's how many jobs. So they're not just focused on immediate profit, but they are appealing to a more longer-term interest. I think that they will succeed. On the right is Australia. In Victoria, they're now creating a factory, and there's a town called Geelong. There was a Ford factory that closed, and a Hanwha factory was going to be put there in its place under the Morrison administration, but now under Prime Minister Albanese. If you look at the bottom right, the Minister of Defense of South Korea visited, and relations between the ROK and Australia are deepening because of these defense ties. Next slide, please. I've been mentioning the relations with the US. The US ROK alliance itself is very strong, but in terms of technology, it was tough for South Korea. But now, at last, the ROK has been able to reach the stage where it is now, and they have serious intentions to enter the US market. And the US is welcoming this. In the ROK US joint statement, the global defense supply chain is something where the ROK, relatively speaking, compared to the past, is very important. And the US is acknowledging the importance of the ROK's technological prowess. And the ROK is intending to enter the US market more seriously. You can see a qualification test being done using Korean equipment in the United States in the image at the bottom. Next slide, please. Including for a K9 and an autonomous vehicle. So this was brief, but I have a summary for the implications for Japan. First, the ROK does not depend on the United States. The Koreans said that a country without technology will perish. I think that this is something we can learn from. When it comes to technology, people take up the natural sciences, but there's also human sciences, economic standpoints. All of these perspectives are necessary for the defense industry. Also, using technology as a starting point, the ROK has been able to engage in diplomatic activities, and it's very valuable for them. Also, the establishment of an export system, including a legal system and export procedures. The next point is something that Japan is not good at. The Koreans are very quick in making decisions, maybe too quick. In Japan, if we went abroad, then we would have to come back to Tokyo for consultations. And while doing that, the Koreans would have already made the decision. This has happened. The next point, number 6, is that understanding of the public is important. In October, there'll be a large defense expo in South Korea, but the last weekend, the public, I think maybe 200,000 have come, and this has raised the interest of the public. Thank you very much for your attention.
That was a very important points that you've made. Thank you very much. Now, we are now going to move into our question and answer time. There's one other person that I would like to introduce, which is Toshi Nobita. He has a very impressive career at Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and is now one of the prime motivators for our ISIC. I would like to, he's in a way our representative today, and I would like to ask him to propose some questions to our speakers today. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. As introduced, I am Nabeta, currently with the ISIC. You mentioned Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. I actually was with Mitsubishi Trading, forgive me. And today, my role is one of, among the wonderful information that we've heard from several presentations, to look at how this Defense Production Base Reinforcement Act, or law, which is something that we've never had, Up until now, it's a very new thing. To understand this better, we see this as the first step for reinforcing our defense production base. It's very important to see how we can actually secure that first step in the best way. So I will ask some questions, I think, from a third-party standpoint to try to deepen our understanding on this theme. That would be my hope anyway. And first of all, I would like to address Director Matsumoto. The two major pillars of the defense production base, I don't think you went into this in too much detail, but there are two, I think, pillars to this. One is the reinforcement of the production base, which we have a budget for 36.2 billion yen. And the other is the 40 billion yen for funding. This is going to be implemented very soon, starting in October. So my question is, in using these funds, each of the companies in the defense industry, I would expect, would be asking a lot of questions, inquiries, and so forth. What do we actually see from the industry side, from the defense industry side? What do you see as their level of enthusiasm or show of interest in this? Could you talk about that, please, within the extent possible?
Thank you very much. The law enters into force on October 1st, and the budget, as you say, has already been acquired for this fiscal year. And so we will have to execute that budget within the current fiscal year. As to the Defense Equipment Transfer Fund, there may not be any specific cases this year, but for the four business areas, that 36 billion yen will have to be spent in order to build up our base. And we'll be able to distribute that money to companies that apply. And we have been making this known. And we have had applications, including suppliers. They have been preparing their applications. Therefore, once the law enters into force, I believe that those applications will be submitted because many companies have been preparing their applications. We are in the final stages of coordination of that preparation. In order to be able to execute that budget within the current fiscal year, this work has to be done quickly.
Let me ask something to Dr. Matsumoto. There are other questions coming from the audience to Dr. Hokazono. How long is this budget going to last? Will it last for 5 years? Do you have an answer to that?
Well, the law includes financial measures. So this budget measure has a basis in law. We have been able to secure this. Therefore, in the supplemental provisions of the law, it does say that a revision will be done 5 years from now. Therefore, 5 years from now, the government will have to investigate what should be done about this law, but the scope of the budget will depend on that year's budget. However, it's specified in the law that this money has to be dispersed every year.
Dr. Nobita, please. There's very tough competition, I would surmise, hearing your explanation. On the other hand, you mentioned public comment. I think that's already had a deadline. That's finished, but were there in these public comments things that we should be aware of, that we should be concerned about from this standpoint? Anything about the public comments you would share?
コメントについてはですね、ちょっと私も全部はチェックしてない。まあ、
As to public comment, I have not checked everything, but we got many comments. A lot of them were from those who opposed these policies, especially defense equipment transfer. The comments basically were that it was terrible that the Japanese government will allow exports of defense technology.
I see. In reality, smoothing out the transfer, helping production base and so forth. Do you have any specific examples that would talk about how we can do this? Could you give us some concrete examples, perhaps? It may end up talking about specific companies, equipment manufacturers, but within the limits possible.
Yes, in order to strengthen the base, supply chain risk measures are being taken. Up to now, specific defense items have their parts procured abroad. The parts have to be imported. And if we consider the future, that is a supply chain risk. We don't know whether we'll be able to import them or not. So we should be able to develop alternatives domestically. And the Ministry of Defense should be able to subsidize this. So that's one example of supply chain risk measures. Many suppliers don't know how to proceed. So first of all, cybersecurity they should get a diagnostic, sweat hunting. And the Ministry of Defense will give them the money for this cybersecurity diagnostic. And then you will know what you should do. And then if you have to take measures to strengthen your cybersecurity, then again, the ministry will support you. So there are quite a few companies interested in this.
On what you just described, I would say these are more on the defense side, protecting. But what about on the attacking side? For example, in Japanese defense equipment, there are, in terms of smoothing the transfer capabilities, my personal thought is that, for example, C2 it would be a very effective example. The reason I say that is that it involves for project management, reduction of costs, strengthening international competitiveness, efficiency of manufacturing processes. Also, it fits within the transportation category of the 5 allowed transfer items. And then also, it's completed under, it's a piece of equipment that's completed under Japanese domestic manufacturing. So I would think this is a very encouraging example for the Japanese domestic industry. So, for example, could you, in trying to get the C2 to fix, to meet the NATO specifications, I believe the specifications were modified. It's not necessarily, therefore, after it's been modified, the same as the C2 for domestic use. Is that the sort of thing that we can think of as targets for transfer?
Yes, for defense equipment transfers, we see them as one diplomatic tool. And so the Japanese government wants to promote defense equipment transfers. This was also made clear in the strategic documents of last December. So the government of Japan, when using defense equipment transfer as a tool of diplomacy, will have to think about the needs and requirements of the partner country. Let's say that our existing equipment does not meet the other country's needs. In that case, we would not be able to transfer the equipment. And the Japanese government would have to think more about what specifications might meet their needs. For example, NATO standards or customer-specific requirements. It would be something different than what we had made up to now. It would cost money to redesign. And we are saying that the government of Japan would give the money to do that work and ask the companies to do the work. It would entail costs to do this, but we're asking them to do it.
It looks like he was cut off. Currently, it looks like Matsumoto-san has a technical issue. So then I will use this time to ask a question. My question is to Dr. Ito. Weapons, equipment, selling these things is the beginning of a long relationship. Supplies, components, through these things, these relationships or establishments. What kind of relationship do we want to have with Korea from a strategic standpoint? How do you view this?
すいません。落ちちゃいました。
I'm sorry. Oh, this is Dr. Matsumoto.
すいません。ちょっと途中で落ちちゃって、はい。
I'm sorry.
Dr. Matsumoto, wait for a second, please, if you would. I've just asked a question to Dr. Ito.
なんか雑な答え方に聞こえるかもしれないんですけれども、
My answer might sound a bit basic, but before Ukraine, the ROK would sell wherever they could. So they would first of all try to create a defense agreement, and that would allow sensitive discussions, and then they would sell. They still use this, but after Ukraine, especially under President Yoon, it looks like they are trying to become a supplier for the West. This is part of becoming a global core country, which is part of President Yoon's core strategy.
One other question, please. In Japan's case, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Hitachi, other companies do have sections within the companies that work on military demand. But for example, there is not companies like BAE Systems in Japan. Does Korea have expectations? Can we expect these types of integrated industries in Korea that would get the economies of scale?
スライドで IMF 危機のところでご説明した M&A の部
In
分、
my slides, I talked about mergers and acquisitions following the IMF crisis. Through rationalization, Hanwha has emerged as a global giant. and there's also an LG affiliated company, and this is different than in the US. 90%, 80% of their sales are in defense. Therefore, they have more than one company that is like that.
ありがとうございます。私、インタビュー
Thank you. I intervened, but please, Dr. Nabe, go on. Nabeta. Sorry. I think I was able to ask most of what I wanted to ask, but it's a diplomatic tool. And the country sees that as necessary and is supplying the budgets for making these adjustments. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Oh, Dr. Matsumoto's link seems to have gone down again.
松本さんの
Dr. Matsumoto's technical problems are continuing. Here, let me ask Dr. Hokazono a question that I would like to hear an answer to. It appears there are several, actually, questions that have come in for you. For example, defense export regulations. I think what this person wants to ask, Drew Singh-san, is the future of the principles governing equipment transfer, military equipment transfer. Could you talk about that in a little more detail? Yes, that is a very important point indeed. Originally, the three principles I think you have all heard of for equipment transfer while we are a peaceful country, we have declared that we are going to do transfers. Now, what form is this going to take as an actual practice? How are we going to put this into practice is what we have to look at. Currently, if we look at the operating policies, we're very reluctant. When these three principles were originally created, it was discussed, how are we going to do this? I think it was reviewed, discussed, but it started in a very limited fashion. This law was created in order to make it effective for the security of our country. We need to review this. And I think a discussion towards that is desired. Taniguchi Sensei talked about this. Our military industry within our allies and friendly countries, we are perhaps in too much of a hurry. We're getting some echo. Public opinion is holding us back to some extent on this. I think you were saying something about that. That's probably true for Korea as well. So we need to look at other countries and see what kind of practices are properly applicable for us. I'm sorry, Taniguchi Sensei, can you continue? There are some time limitations. I would like to just talk about this in a limited way. As far as equipment transfers, there's talk about creating a command tower, control tower, so to speak, for the government that will oversee everything. Is there a specific, it doesn't seem like there's a very specific image of what this control tower would look like yet, but I would be curious to ask you, Director Matsumoto, where are we today with this concept of the control tower? If you can talk within what's you're free to talk about, if you could explain something more about this control tower image concept.
Certainly. Can you hear me all right?
We hear you.
The discussion on a so-called control tower does exist, but there are three principles. And the main discussion is what should be done about them. There is a working team in the party in power that is looking at this. The three principles alone will not result in defense transfer being promoted. We've been saying this for a long time. That discussion has been engaged in the government. If you look at the policy menu, it's true that one option would be to create a so-called control tower for these matters within the government. But where would it exist? There's still not yet a consensus within the government. Therefore, within ATLA, we're trying to create a structure, a stronger structure to promote defense equipment transfer. That's the current situation.
Given the image of the government control tower, the impression I get is that with respect to transfer of equipment, of course, that would go through primarily the Defense Department, the Ministry of Defense. But I think also the Ministry of Economics will also be involved. And naturally, if it if there is a transfer, it would involve the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. So I think it needs the coordination between all departments of the government, and maybe we need some kind of Ministry of National Security that would coordinate and bundle all these things together. Is there any discussion or any image of that? That's my understanding is there isn't, but what do you think?
I would have to say that Minister of Defense, METI, MOFA, or the Cabinet Secretariat, or the NSS. This would be the kind of discussion. But both the Cabinet Secretariat and the Prime Minister's office have various command structures. And they also have human resources. How much can be spared is another consideration. This discussion will have to continue. It's not an easy matter to create a so-called control tower. But METI, MOFA, NSS, and MOD are in close touch on a daily basis. The MOFA is creating the OSA, and where we cannot transfer defense equipment, they will compensate our efforts. And close cooperation with MOFA is required on this. So if they ask for us an offset, we are able to mutually support each other. But with respect to structurally, where to have this control tower, we're not ready for that decision yet.
Matsumoto-san, you mentioned OSA. Could you add something to explain that? I think there are many in the audience who may not know of that.
ODA の枠組み
So in official development assistance, it's part of it, ODA. For military organizations, Japan cannot provide ODA. So as a tool of diplomacy, we should be able to offer financial assistance to military organizations. And this is what it is. They're in the midst of trying to implement it. It's not providing actual equipment, but communications equipment or materials, medical supplies, other things that foreign armies might need. MOFA will procure them and then be able to provide them to the foreign government. It's a very new
Thank you.
epoch-making system.
Dr. Nobita, I'm still, I was able to ask the things I wanted to ask. Thank you very much. So for all of you in the audience, you can see that Japan is going through lots of discussions as it changes very greatly. I think at least that was something that I think everyone could have understood. We don't have results. We don't have fruits of all this efforts that we can see. There's a lot of frustration. I think that's something that the audience may also be experiencing, that same frustration. Well, that frustration is going on within Japan as well. I think there's no shortage of that. However, it's a problem that is changing greatly. So at ISIC, we want to continue to deeply delve into this point and share with everyone around the world what is going on in Japan and gain your further understanding of our worldwide audience. And then Japan's movements, motion, reactions are very, we're very slow to react. I think that's something we want to hear from the audience as well. We want that pressure. Given the above, all of those things, I would like to close today's ISIC webinar. We had a huge number of 64 participants in our audience, and we thank our interpreters for their help today. Thanks to them, we have been able to break through the wall between English and Japanese languages, and we look forward again with anticipation to our next meeting. And we thank each of the panelists very much for your participation. We hope to see you again. That will conclude today's webinar.